Howdy, folks, and welcome to Influmensirs, a podcast where we explore influential men and their influence on men and the broader conversation around masculinity as a whole. Today's episode is another bonus episode regarding the Enneagram theory of personality. So last episode was about Enneagram 2s. So we're going to continue in numeric order and now discuss Enneagram 3s. So the place that I kind of wanted to start for our time today is a little bit around an element that I haven't explored too much with the previous two that I've done. So I've done Enneagram 1s, I've done Enneagram 2s, but for discussion of Enneagram 3s, this just feels like an apt time to discuss it. But one of the ways in which we can distinguish more distinctly between individual people that have the same core type, right? So they'd all be type 5 or they'd all be type 7 is something called subtype. So really quickly, because I'll have a whole nother episode about this, there are 3 different subtypes within the Enneagram. So one of them is called self-preservation, which really quickly at a glance, self-preservation is as it sounds. It's this idea of in order to get your survival needs met, which all of the subtypes are going to be distinguished by the way in which they get their survival needs met. But for self-preservation, it is through one's own self, through one's own merit, through one's own work, whatever that might look like to help them survive. And then for social, that's going to be where you stand with the herd, with the group, with the workplace, with the family, how you connect in those spaces and what you provide there will assist you in getting your survival needs met. And then the last one, it has 2 names, one-to-one and then sexual. I prefer describing it as one-to-one. So this is the idea that you get your survival needs met based on either one particular relationship, which sometimes it can be romantic, but not always. It can be a close friend. It can be a parent, or it can be a very particular and very chosen community. So just throwing that out there, we will have an entirely separate episode where we explore that in more detail. So as I shared more deeply last week, the most important thing when we're exploring any of these types is looking at their core motivation. So for type 3s, it's going to be around success. So what success is going to vary by person, right? For certain folks, it's going to be success as measured by academics, or success as measured by athletics, or success as measured by business. There's so many different things that it could be, right? And so in some ways, the reason that you want to succeed is due to a more deeper and profound fear around failing, right? So all of us don't want to fail, right? Like failing is one of the scariest things. But for type 3s, I would argue it is most deeply felt, we might say. So yeah, and then along those same lines, it can kind of vary what they're afraid of failing at. There's a general fear and greater than other types around failing. But in particular, the way in which you would fail would bring on the most distress and thereby be so motivating. So it could be a fear of failing in career, or it could be relationships. There's so many different qualifiers that it could be. But what tends to happen, or what tends to be experienced for a lot of 3s in a lot of different ways, is a low level anxiety because you're so motivated around success, especially in our culture, which we'll talk even about this a little bit more. We put so much emphasis on externalized success that one of the anxious things that brings on when you don't want to fail and you do want to succeed and everything is kind of emphasizing the external, there can be that fear, concern of like, oh, wait, in all of this pursuit of that which is external, right? Is there something underneath all of my endeavors for success? So as for their energy, I would say that type 3s tend to be very task oriented, right? So they really like to get shit done, you might say. All types can be good at this for various reasons, some better than others. But I would say for type 3s, they are number one at getting shit done, so to speak. And then tied to that is this idea that they have a lot of energy. So they can kind of work really long hours, really push through, and kind of work really, really hard because, again, they just want to be successful. Like that the notion of success is so paramount, and the fear of not having it so intense that you'll put as many hours as is needed in order to get that. The other thing that can be true, and again, this is more, I would argue, more in unhealthy spaces. When they're healthy, I wouldn't say this is as true, but yeah, at times there can be a surface levelness with them, especially in conversation. So it's not to say that they are surfacey themselves, but it's more about when they're connecting with other people, they can struggle to connect more meaningfully because they might be more talking about either things for themselves or with the person that they're talking to, what is external that they're pursuing, right? It could be a goal, but it could also be a vacation. It's not that any of that is outright bad. It's more that it can make it difficult for them to pursue depth, which, as we'll talk about later, is actually something really important for them. So another thing that I would say that is true for type 3s is this idea of them being addicted to motion. So when you are striving for success in some ways, and this is almost a spiritual notion, but is illusory, or at least it's always changing. It's always evolving. It's so hard to grasp. It's like smoke. So then there is your need to always be on the move, or that addiction to motion. And then another thing I'd say, just energy wise, is they tend to have a lot of passion around whatever is their expertise or something that they're pursuing, especially vocationally. So again, it could be business, it could be academics, it could be athletics, whatever it may be. These folks know their thing and they know it really well, and they do it really well. So as far as their behavior, they tend to be working on whatever is the next thing, right? So there's this sense that they, and then another other types, type 7 and type 8, they tend to be what's called future oriented, right? Which means any of us can spend meaningful time thinking about the future, right? But when I'm talking about orientation, it's kind of like a true north, right? And the Enneagram contends that there are some of us that tend to focus too much on the past, some that tend to focus too much on the present, but the wrong kind of present, and then some folks that tend to spend too much time thinking about the future. And for type 3s, that's very much present. And then another thing that I would say is that they're very adaptable, right? So in some ways, this is, you could argue, the shadow side, but in another sense, it's almost a somber thing that a lot of times when they got that internalized message that you need to be successful, it sort of means that you need to present yourself in whatever way that's going to look like to be successful. So it can be hard for them to feel grounded. It can be hard for them to feel like they maybe have, favorites or particular passions around things, right? They may be passionate, and especially about that which, they're pursuing vocationally, or even about their relationships and things like that. But it's a little bit challenging for them to assert things in a strong manner, particularly around tastes and interests. So, but yeah, in the same vein, though, they're very personable. They're especially personable if it's something around helping you succeed. They really care about that. And then just also a tendency toward workaholism. And again, it's many types struggle with this for totally different reasons. But again, what I would argue, it's because that pursuit and that striving for success can be really, really strong. And then in the midst of that can be all that they see. And then it can kind of blur other parts of their lives. So for famous examples, one that I would say is LeBron James, the king himself. So we had done an episode where we had discussed the true GOAT. I do really like LeBron James, but I do not think he's the GOAT of basketball. I think he's the second best. But anyway, when we were talking about Michael Jordan, one of the things that I was talking about is sort of the personality difference between the two. And one of the ways that I kind of like, as I've explored this and then been a hoop fan for all of my life, the reason why I think LeBron fits into this category is, so a lot of times with 3s, that desire for success a lot of times is going to be built around efficiency. So if we kind of think about, especially how basketball lately has gone more and more toward efficiency. A lot of times when you'll hear LeBron talk about analytics, or again, that deep knowledge of the sport, as I was mentioning before, passion about whatever their vocation is, he's most concerned with making the best play, not necessarily the most dominant play or the most me play. So what I mean by that is He'll talk a lot about how he will pass and defer a shot if it is a more efficient shot that's more likely to lead to success than for him to take a shot. And again, this is not to say that he doesn't take those shots, because he definitely does. And he found success doing that. But he's also willing to pass to an open teammate, whatever's going to bring that success. So again, that's why I'd argue he's that type 3 category. And then another healthy example. So this is again when referring to the subtypes. I would argue that Aragorn would fit into this category, and more the film version, right? So in our most recent episode, we described Aragorn, and some of the other guys felt differently. But one of the things that I think is true about Aragorn is, in particular, so all kinds of 3s that you're going to come across are going to have concern around success. But the way that subtype, or that idea of self-preservation, social, or one-to-one, that's going to inform how that success comes from. So one of the things that tends to be true for that particular subtype, self-pres, which is what I think Aragorn would fall into, is a vanity around not having vanity. So these are really inside baseball terms, but basically it's this sense of, you want to look good and you want to show that to other people around you, but you genuinely are concerned with looking good. And that's not bad, but it's more when it is left unexamined, then it can make it difficult to get to the core of, I am maybe living for the eyes of others. I am kind of, in Aragorn's case, presenting to the fellowship in a particular way where, over time, and as he accepts more things about himself, he takes ownership. Like, I do want to be, the king. I don't want to, fall to the vanity, so to speak, that my ancestor did and what he did with the ring. But that doesn't mean that I can't put myself out there and, pursue the success of what it could look like to be a good king, right? He just goes for it. So. Yeah. And then some common mistypes. So 3s are going to look a lot like 1s, because again, both are going to be really hardworking. They're going to both be very passionate, but the way in which I think they're going to be a bit different is, as I talked about in the 1s episode, they're going to be really concerned about what's morally good, right? But for 3s, while they can be as concerned about morality as anybody or any type, it's more going to be a preoccupation or motivated by the eyes of others, or their own internal definition of what success looks like. So that's what I would say is the main difference between those two. And 3s and 7s, so they're going to have a lot in common. They're going to both be very assertive, forward-facing, dynamic, personable, charming, a lot of those things, really common between 3s and 7s. But whereas 7s are kind of looking more often to what's fun, what's exciting, what's enthusiastic. It's not that 3s are not going to experience that, but it's more that it's going to come back to what's going to bring me success, but also what's going to be most efficient. And then another common mistype is 3s and 8s. So again, similar to 3s and 7s, 3s and 8s, both assertive, like to get stuff done, can be forward facing, not afraid of a crowd, so to speak. But then the way in which I would see that they are different is 8s tend to operate a lot out of anger or passion, or their struggle can be called lust. And for 3s, it's less so that. It's going to be more about again, how they're coming across to others, that adaptability. Sometimes it can be called chameleon-like. It's a good and bad thing. If anything, it's kind of a neutral thing. And then kind of the conversational pattern that tends to be common is a little bit of a elevator pitch. And so what I mean by that is this idea of they kind of genuinely want to show to you and to people around that, like, hey, I'm competent in whatever the area may be, right? So it can be competent in relationships. It can be competence in the work project. It could be competence in knowing about a given topic that everyone, is sort of talking about. It's neither good nor bad. Another thing that we kind of review in this pod is what can be described as a given type's tell. Again, I've talked about the tell being sort of something that when you observe that energy in someone else, you think, oh, they may be operating from this motivating principle. Maybe that's part of where their behavior is coming from, that kind of thing. So again, it's going to be that idea of like addiction to motion. So moving from thing to thing, from task to task. Also similar, what I would argue to 2s, where they can kind of know what energy or what way they need to shift in a given environment to best help them or the group or their partner, which is a really good thing. But then at the same time, in that adaptation, then they struggle themselves with, okay, I adapted, but then what do I need underneath? Right. So for twos, it's a little bit more, I know what you need, but what do I need? For threes, it's, I adapted to whatever I needed to do to survive in a given space or help the group with whatever we're needing. But then now I also am kind of struggling with what I truly or genuinely need. And then some institutions that have archetypal three energy. I would argue the United States itself, sort of and honestly, in the healthier way, right? Pursuing your dreams, pushing forward, striving for what's excellent, and again, in the best and the healthiest sense. And then, anything that has sort of like a crowd or like a stage, you might say, particularly where they can demonstrate excellence or competence with the very thing that they pursue and that they put a lot of time and stock into. So yeah, that's our show for today, and look for type fours. I'll do them next, but yeah, like and subscribe and do all the good stuff, and I'll see you guys on this or the next Influmencer that we'll be reviewing. Regardless, hope y'all are having a wonderful day. Peace.